This is the third year I'm doing this video. And it's so funny how I always look forward to talking about it, but I also never look forward to talking about it. But at the end of the day, this is a story I always tell myself that needs to be told. And at age 33, I'd like to believe that I am a man of conviction. So, like it or not, ready or not, here I go. In the past, I have shared the fact that I did at one point contemplate suicide. And over the last 2 years, on this day, I have shared why. But for those who are new, for those of you who don't know, or for those who might actually be contemplating suicide yourselves and need some perspective, permit me to explain. When I was a little kid, I like to believe that when I was a little kid, I was a pretty happy kid, pretty fun, and pretty outgoing. But when I was really young, my grandmother, on my mother's side, who just recently passed away, right before Memorial Day, on Memorial Day weekend actually, didn't necessarily believe it. And she based it, and from what I was told, my mother was actually giving me a bath in the sink. I was a little baby when this happened, and I think some people still do that, don't they? Like give little babies a bath in the sink. Anyway, my grandmother just out of the blue walks up to my mother and says, "There's something wrong with your son." Now, according to my mother, the reason for this is I was a kid who didn't really smile very much, which something about that doesn't really seem right, but whatever. So eventually, my mother and father took me to Rochester Hospital. Now, for those of you who are familiar with what Rochester does, you know where this is going. But for those who don't know, bear with me. Now I don't know what the people of Rochester said to me. I don't know what, they told my parents. Years go by, and it was pretty much just life as usual. I was a pretty happy kid, pretty, fun kid. I wasn't a perfect kid by any means, but, I like to think life was pretty okay. And that happened up until middle school, when, I had been picked on by these kids for a good while now. And so I said to them that I'm going to kill them. Now, keep in mind, I'm a kid who doesn't watch the news at this time. Like, I had barely any idea of what the Columbine incident was. So, little what I know, I get myself into a whole lot of trouble for, saying I'm going to kill you to these kids. For the record, it's been roughly 15 years. Actually, probably 20 years So I forgave these guys. Although now that I'm thinking about it, you know, I'm just saying snitches get stitches, right? I mean, obviously they snitched on me after I said I was going to kill them, because that's exactly what, snitches do, right? I got myself 4 days of in-school suspension for it. It was supposed to be 5, but my mom I want to think my mom saved the day, getting me out of there a day early. But now I realize it kind of came at a cost. Because the people at, Horseheads Middle School asked my mom if there was something wrong with me. And she then said, well, at this point, I don't need to finish what she said, because I can already tell you what she said. She said that there was something wrong with me, and what was wrong with me was, at this time, I was on the autism spectrum. Now again, for years, no one told me about this. No one explained this to me. No one even bothered to talk to me about what it is. I never had been in any kind of education classes for it or nothing. But because of what my mom did, I had to be put in special ed. And whereas in the beginning of middle school, things were, tough, but I could brush them off. It then became a place I really wasn't looking forward to going to. Excuse me. And for the next 5 years, really about, 7, 8, 9, 10, really 4 years, I was in special ed, from the middle of my 7th grade year to the middle of my 11th grade year. I'll explain why that is in a minute. I was labeled. I was put in special ed. And it was hell for me. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, if you're getting bullied by anyone, surely it's going to get worse, right? Well, here's the thing. Yeah, kids can be cruel, but they're also smart. I mean, they knew to not make fun of anyone on the spectrum. It's actually about as worse as saying is, what I did to get myself in there in the first place. So they found a way to, make fun of me through other means. My size or, the sound of my voice. I mean, whether it was true or not, I knew exactly what they were really making fun of. It was at that point I came to the conclusion that, okay, since people already know, all I can really do at this point is just make it through graduation my senior year of high school, and wait for enough time to pass so that people forget and, move on, and maybe therefore I can move on with my life, or, maybe I'll just live the rest of my life in solitude, something along those lines. I don't know. But at least I had an idea of what my life would be like. Because, when I graduate, I've never seen these special education people ever again. And believe me, I've got reasons why I'm mad at them that I'll share in a minute. And I say in a minute, it'll be a little bit before I get to that, but trust me, I'll get to it. So my plan again, make it to graduation, pretty much live life in solitude after that. Obviously, go to college and stuff like that. Wait for enough time to pass so people forget, and then, move on and everything's back to normal. That was the plan until my sophomore year of high school. I was in health class when this happened, and we were talking about mental illnesses. Now, keep in mind, I had been in special ed for about 3 years at that point. 7th to 8th, 9th, 10th, so 3 years. And again, I'm still holding on to that plan of, wait until I graduate, wait for enough time to pass, live life in solitude, and if I run into these people ever again, maybe enough time has passed and forgotten, etc., etc. When we were, during our discussions about mental illnesses in health class, we watched a movie called I Am Sam. If you don't know what that movie is, it's Sean Penn plays an autistic man who has a kid with this one woman. This one woman straight up leaves. So Sean Penn's character is forced to watch and raise this little girl. And for all intents and purposes, he's a good dad. But during the movie, I think they're at a kid's party, and keep in mind, it's been years since I've seen this movie, so I kind of forget what happens. But actually, let me get a little comfortable. There we go. During this kid's party, Sean Penn's character, his name is Sam, obviously, gives the birthday kid an attaboy or something like that, and then everyone at the party freaks out, really freaks out. And, I'm thinking, well, what's wrong? All I did was just give the kid, who wished he happy birthday, pat on the back or something. That doesn't seem so bad. But eventually, it leads to, there's a big court case about it, so whether or not, they take the kid away from him, and it's a big court case, and it was at that point, I began to ask myself, what if that happens to me? If somehow, by the grace of God, I meet a beautiful woman, start a family with her, and somehow something happens where she's out of the picture, maybe she leaves or, heaven forbid, dies, and I'm forced to, and I have to raise our kid, or kids, if we have multiple kids, on my own. Are they going to take my kids away from me? Now, I understand that right now I'm 33 years old. I know that I have a support system. If anything like this were to happen to me, there are people in my life, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, nephews, friends and family, cousins and aunts and uncles. My grandparents are still alive. Hold on. I'm not going to work for my grandparents. I have people in my life who would help me physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. They would be there for me and help me get through this. I know that now. Here's the thing, though. 16-year-old Nick Cutler does not know this. He's too busy being traumatized and coming to the realization that, oh my God, there's no escape from this, is there? This autism spectrum bullshit is going to follow me wherever it is I go. this isn't living. This can't be a way to live. And it was at that point when, the wheels started turning to the point where I would eventually contemplate suicide. And from then on, I'll never forget what life was like. Because the way it worked was, at Horseheads, you had 5 classes a day, roughly 80 minutes, and one of those classes was essentially lunch and study hall. For study hall, that's when, we had to report to, I had to report to that special education class, where you'd have, group work and processing stuff, and basically the kind of stuff that, to this day, I really can't stand. And I remember just not belonging in there whatsoever, even for what I did. And it was horrible. Being in that class was absolutely horrible for me. In fact, it was being in special ed that cost me getting a girlfriend in 8th grade. Oh yeah. Now, keep in mind, there was this one girl I really did like, and she did like me back, but I wasn't entirely sure if, how to go. Come on, no girl ever really thought I was cute before. And, I never really knew what any of the quote-unquote signals were. But I know she did like me enough where, if I just, try asking her out, I get a chance to do it. Now, before I continue on, the way it worked between Horseheads Middle School and Horseheads High School, I just mentioned that Horseheads High School was 5 80-minute classes a day. Horseheads was more 9 or 10 40-minute classes a day. 20 minutes for lunch and 20 for study hall. And what happened on this particular day that I'm about to describe, the day I was about to, maybe talk to this girl and, maybe ask her out. Because it was between me and one other person that she liked. When I was I was at lunch, and this is what outed me regarding people knowing I was in special ed, for the most part. That was, we all had to eat lunch together. And there was this one kid who, for the most part, was probably about, let's say, as high functioning as I am, who frankly didn't belong in there either. But, he was acting silly. And back then, and this is before people really got tolerant, I called the kid a retard. Now, before you freak out, let me explain. Yes, I know now that, calling him a retard, not a good thing to do. But you need to look at it from my perspective. Because believe it or not, when I was a kid, I was deathly terrified of swearing. And on top of that, there really are a lot of words that are worse than retard. I could have called him an asshole. I could have called him a bitch or a bastard. May I remind you that there are 7 words you're not allowed to say on television and radio. And 6 of them, for sure, are worse than the word retard. Not to mention, do I even need to tell you that the N-word exists? My point is, there are varying degrees of evil, and unfortunately people to this day don't recognize that. And it was especially worse even back then. Again, lots of words, including 6 of the 7 words you're not allowed to say on television and radio, again, with the exception of the 7th one. And yet, retard was a bad enough word for this kid to snitch on me. And what happened was, after lunch, I had English class where this girl was. I was in the class with this girl. And just as I was about to talk to her, I immediately had to leave the room, and I had to be back in, the special education room for that class time. All because the kid snitched on me. If I could redo that whole day, I would simply, I'd get to that room, they would tell me why I'm even there, because, again, I got snitched on. And if I could redo that whole moment all over again, I would have just been like, bye-bye, and just walk immediately back to class and not care if I got in trouble. To this day, I regret not doing that. Especially because of what wound up happening. Do you remember earlier when I said that this girl was choosing between me and some other guy? Literally the next day, she chose the other guy. Oh yeah. I wouldn't realize it then, but that was the first time. Here's the thing, by all accounts, looking back on it, that was the first time I truly ever got my heart broken. I mean, granted, it would get worse years later. But it was at that point I came to the conclusion that, no woman is ever going to like me, and no woman is ever going to, want to be with me, much less hold my hand. And that was pretty much my mentality for years on end. Sorry, I need a moment to think for a second. Right, I believe I was I was going to talk about, I was in special ed for 4 years. I also forgot to mention, my grades were actually good enough to be in something called Summer Science Institute, which basically was, in the summers before your 8th grade and 9th grade year, you could essentially take Earth Science and take your Regents exam before you entered high school. In New York State, we have Regents exams. And it was during the summer for 3 hours a day, maybe 3 days a week. And again, just take Earth Science classes, and at 11 o'clock you're supposed to go home. I couldn't go home because some of the special education kids were in that class as well. And remember how I mentioned I hated doing, processing and group work and stuff like that? I had to do that during the summer too. So when I say I was in there for, 4 years, again, 8th grade, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, some of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, so that's 4 years. With those 2 summers, it might as well have been 5. And I hated it. I also can't prove this either, but I'm 100% convinced that, and I'll get into this on Friday when I do talk about some housekeeping. One of my few escapes from this feeling of inadequacy, came in the form of choir. And by the time I was a freshman in high school, I really began to excel in my ability to sing. Naturally, the smart thing to do would be to audition for the better choir, concert choir. And, I'm a freshman, but I had so much potential. And, with concert choir, I'd be able to really soar. And I would admit, there was a lot of pretty girls in that choir too. I was a lovesick puppy back then. Not only did I not make it into the choir, but the reasons why and the people who got into this day still really irk me, because I was predominantly a choir singer. Like, my voice is the most powerful thing I've got. And I can tell you for a fact, to this day, by the time I graduated from Horseheads, I was the very best singer in that entire building, hands down. I not only not make concert choir, but for starters, there are people who never even were in choir at all. Or to me, what's worse, they were in band. And they get in over me. Not to mention that choir teachers, and one of these days I really want to have a heart-to-heart with this guy regarding what happened. Because his reasoning for why I never made concert choir was because I wasn't mature enough. That reminds you, you have upperclassmen who are talking about smoking weed, and they get in over me. If I have to guess why I really didn't get in, it's because my sophomore year, a bunch of students that were in the special education class were going to do choir as well, and they thought it'd be easier to group us all together. That has to be the reason why. It's the only logical explanation there is. Again, one of these days I want to have a heart-to-heart with that one choir teacher regarding this. But eventually, around the middle of my 11th grade year, I got myself out of that class. You're probably wondering how I did it, right? Well, the short answer is I got out of there on my own. The long answer is, over the years, I sort of made a pretty decent name for myself. I was good in school. My grades were pretty solid. I was doing sports. I made the football team, wrestling. I became more outgoing and confident, and a lot of people really started to like me for once. And it was great. And I'll get into this later, but what kept me going through all this really was the people that I met along the way. What can I say? It's a big world, but damn if there are any nice people in it. Eventually, again, middle of my 11th grade year, I got out of that class. Because again, I became more outgoing and fun and everything. I was out of that class my senior year. In fact, I've said this before and I'll say it again. My senior year at Horseheads, that was my best year, hands down. And now you know why, because I'm not in special ed anymore. But by that point, the damage had already been done. I could not possibly express how degrading it is that I'm a senior, a veritable big man on campus. But because of all those years I was in special ed, you've got underclassmen, even freshmen, calling me Rain Man. I never even seen that movie, but I know what it is. I mean, come on, that's just not right. And to make matters worse, I would eventually have to repeat my senior year at a place called Trinity Pollen. And it was at that point I told myself that was where I was going to die. Now, naturally, that didn't happen. And tomorrow I'll get into why. But because of everything that happened, I really have been, for many years, just going through the motions of life. Going with the flow, if you will. And what really bothers me more is just the faculty I had when I was in special ed. They really were not very good people. I mean, I'll get into this a little bit later in the video. I don't doubt that they weren't trying to do their job, but I swear they really were like they had sort of burnt out of it, like kind of didn't want to be there mentality. And I really do fear that mentality is rubbed off on my generation. I'll never forget this. This happened about a month or so after I graduated from college. My brother was in town and he wanted to visit some of his friends from Notre Dame High School. He went to Notre Dame High School. I went to Horseheads. And he invited me to tag along because, he's cool like that. For being, I'm going to get into this a little bit later in the video too, but my brother really is both arrogant and insensitive, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So I go to this one party that my brother invites me to tag along at with his friends, and really are having fun. It's been a couple hours. Everyone's had a few drinks. I mean, I was the designated driver, so I didn't drink. But people are having drinks, having fun. We're laughing. Everything's going fine. But this one girl, who was actually the host of the party, is at her house. She was like working with special education students as well. And I'm sorry, I need to pause for a minute to really emphasize just how bad this is. She referred to her students as little retards. Keep in mind, this woman is a teacher to these students. And she's calling them that. If you think that doesn't sound right, no shit. And this should also be the part where if you're an educator, I'll give you a second to pause the video so you can vomit at the idea that just happened. Because, and keep in mind, I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher, so maybe my perspective is different. But I'm pretty sure no teacher worth their weight in salt would ever even think this. And now I know what you're probably thinking, well, Nick, you just mentioned how, everyone had a few drinks, everyone's having fun. She was probably drunk. And that may be. But there are three kinds of people in life who will always tell you the truth. Angry people, children, and drunks. And this woman was in her mid-20s. So what does that leave you? For years, I meant to take this information and take it to my grave. Up until about 2 years ago, that was the plan. To which point you're probably asking, well, Nick, if your plan was to never tell anyone about this, why are you telling the story now? What made you tell the story a couple years ago? Well, believe it or not, I am looking for a job change. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I work with my father at my family shop. And, there are some good people who work there, to be sure. My father included, obviously. But there are some people that I really can't stand. Like, I really can't stand. To put things into perspective, there was this one person who worked there who actually passed away in 2022. And this guy was just one of the worst. The literal worst. Like, the kind of person who would immediately harass people to get his way. The kind of people who pick fights that he would lose to me, by the way, if it ever happened. And, just the worst. In fact, one of two things was going to happen to this guy. He was either going to get his ass beat, Or actually, no. He was either going to die or get his ass beat down to the ground and then die. The former wound up happening, just simply dying. He was a druggie, in case anyone's wondering. Yet, surprisingly, his toxicology report came clean. I think he had like a pretty, some sort of myopathy where his heart was too big or something. And then, that killed him, turns out the drug uses and stuff like that. And before I continue on with the career change and everything, keep in mind, even though I was clearly no longer in special ed, and even though you would think I'd be able to put it behind me, I still couldn't help but feel guilty about it. Especially when I went to Trinity Pauling, there was this one person who I thought was the literal worst, who figured out that I was on the spectrum. Now keep in mind, I didn't say a word about it. I was trying to take this to my grave. This guy figured out the old-fashioned way. I just simply, he just simply guessed and he rolled with it. And because this guy just happened to be the biggest, baddest person on campus, of course he could get away with saying it. And I will say this, it took about 10 years for me to forgive this guy. So I did eventually forgive him. I mean, this person, to my knowledge, lives all the way on the other side of the country. Chances are I'm never going to see this person again. And it'd been 10 years and he clearly hadn't done anything since, so I figured, why not forgive him? So I did. Anyway, back to the career change I was talking about. I'm looking for a career change, and believe it or not, there are some programs and there are some organizations that can help facilitate, finding a different career. If you explain that you are disabled in any way. Obviously, at the time, believing that I was on the spectrum, and, obviously, as much as I didn't want anyone to know, the beauty of this is, this is the kind of organization where, you can utilize this program for as long as you need, and, when you got what you need, you can simply, forget about it, you're done with it, move on. So basically, that was the plan, just using, never to worry about it ever again, just simply, just do what you gotta do and move on. But here's the thing, you can't just simply say that you're disabled and they will immediately help you find a job. You can't just say, hey, look, I'm on the spectrum, can you help me? It doesn't work that way. They actually have to run a few tests to make sure everything is everything as it seems. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is a government-related thing I'm doing here. And, they run a few, tests. They ask me a couple questions, some math-related questions. A series of questions involved, a few puzzles. Or they ask me about a situation. I have to point to any kind of emotion in front of me, which a couple questions revolved emotions that weren't listed on the thing or whatever. They asked me to define some words using my own words, stuff like that. And eventually, they came to the conclusion of what's really wrong with me. What I really have is a combination of depression and something called pragmatic communication disorder. Depression, I don't think really needs explaining. Lots of people are depressed. Pretty sure that needs no explanation. Regarding pragmatic communication disorder, it comes in a lot of different ways. For me, it's the fact that I like to use my hands to explain things, as you've probably no doubt noticed. As well as my ability to keep eye contact really is horrible. I really do try and work on that, but I always forget to do it. But that's the thing. Neither depression or pragmatic communication disorder are on the spectrum. We would later find out that all those years ago at Rochester Hospital, they got the diagnosis wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. That was the first time I felt as if I could breathe again. It really felt as if a weight was lifted off of my shoulders. And for once, it really felt like I could move on. I really could almost cry. But I couldn't. This is something I wanted to hear for 30 years, and the one emotion that would have been beautiful and emphasized just how great it is, I couldn't do. Because I was angry. For 30 years, I had to deal with feelings of depression, rejection, contemplations of suicide, inadequacy, the belief that my insensitive, arrogant brother's the favorite child. Hey, listen, I'm just saying, you wouldn't put the favorite kid in special ed, okay? Not to mention, knowing my brother, if the roles were reversed and he was in special ed, he probably does wind up committing suicide. I'm just saying. All of that didn't need to happen at all. And I'm forever going to be traumatized by that. Well, admittedly, I have been trying to get some work done about that. You know, I go to therapy, which everybody should do. And I really think as if I've come far regarding sort of, you know, moving on from it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think what bothers me the most about it is, you know, I was just a kid. And I had to do whatever the adults told me to do. Or believe whatever the adults told me to believe. Of course, I never believed I was on the spectrum. Of course, I certainly didn't see it. But tell that to the adults who claim they know better. You know, tell that to the people of Rochester who clearly have been doing this for many years, even long before I was born. Tell that to the people at Horseheads because they're the educators and therefore they know better. Or tell that to my late grandmother who just simply thinks she can figure it out all because I'm not smiling. And to this day, even though my grandmother's gone, I still can't help but be mad at both her and my mom. Because the fact that my grandmother just simply walked up to my mom saying that there's something wrong with me, I'm sorry, that's just plain rude. I'm not entirely, because ultimately her cause of death was dementia. Like, I'm not entirely convinced that even back in the 90s she was suffering from dementia. But what's worse is the fact, at least to me, my mom just stood there and took that. Listen, I have a bunch of lady friends who are moms, and I can tell you for a fact that if that sort of thing happened to them, they would never sit there and take it. They would tell those people off, to be sure. Even if it was their own mother doing that to them, they would tell them off. And, that's the thing. Like, I'm my mom's kid, not my grandma's kid. Let my mom raise me the way she wants to. But my mom got easily influenced. That's what led to here. And to think it all lead up to me contemplating suicide. And even after I stopped contemplating, there was again all those feelings of depression, rejection, contemplations of suicide, feeling that my brother was the favorite child. The waking up every day thinking, oh, screw it. Or, I told myself I was never going to say the F-bomb, but I have to be truthful about this. I would wake up every morning saying, oh, fuck me. I'm still considered an autistic retard. It broke me. It got to the point where I contemplated suicide. Also due to the fact that, and I'll explain more about this, nothing I do that would normally make me feel better would work. I'll talk about more on that tomorrow. And that's where we are right now. I know this video has been pretty sad and pretty heavy to get through. So I'm not going to end this video on a sad note. So I guess I could first talk about, the people at, my grandmother. I mean, I literally just said my grandmother clearly didn't know what she was talking about. And maybe she was suffering from dementia even back then. Maybe not. And, I mean, look, she's dead now. So, I guess over time, especially in the last several months, I kind of had less of a reason to be mad. I guess the one thing I can regret, though, is... Because here's the thing, I'm the kind of guy who really will seek justice if he has to. I never did get a chance to tell my grandmother off. Because what she did eventually led to this moment even. By the time I really could have been able to do that, she was already suffering from dementia way beyond any kind of point where, if I told her off, she'd probably forget. And as wrong as it would be for me to do that, it also really wouldn't be satisfying. So I guess I'm forever going to have to live with not having done that. Or, say, listen, you were wrong with what you said, by the way. There's nothing wrong with me at all. I'm not your kid. I'm my mom's kid. Let my mom figure that out. Something to that degree. But that's just something I gotta live with. Regarding Rochester, listen, yeah, they got my diagnosis wrong. And trust me, to this day, I'm gonna be mad about that probably for the rest of my life. But I can't deny that, Rochester has helped hundreds of thousands of people over the years. Obviously they haven't found a cure for autism, but they are the experts. There's a reason why lots of people consider, Rochester Hospital like an authority on the matter of the autism spectrum. Some would even argue that they are the authority regarding the autism spectrum. Again, they've helped lots of people. This is just one of those rare occasions that, even the best made a mistake. I just wish it didn't happen to me. And regarding the faculty at Horseheads, again, I've got no doubt that they at least had a job to do, and so they did it as piss poor as they did. Which is why, listen, if some people wanted to take this video of the fact that, because this is essentially what happens when the system gets it wrong. And at this point, it's no secret that the special education system really is complete garbage. And if people want to use this video as a means to, sort of further their argument as to why, something needs to be changed about the special education system, either you make great changes or completely abolish it, I wouldn't stop anybody. But know that that isn't how I feel anymore. I'll say anymore. I'll get to the why in a minute. In my heart of hearts, I really do believe that there are some good people out there who, for probably their entire lives, wanted to make a living being a special education teacher. And because they went through all the necessary education, requirements, certifications, hours and hours and hours of teaching, they are able to do their dream job for a living. And because of that, they are able to make a living. They're able to put a roof over their heads. They're able to pay the bills. They're able to put food on the table. If they're, feed their families. If they're able to, if they have families. If they have kids, they're probably using what they're making to make a living to pay for their kids' college or whatever. Do you remember earlier when I said I was at that one party that my brother invited me to go to? And that, and the hostess was drunk and she referred to the special education students that she's, teaching over the summer as little retards? I can't tell you how guilty I am to this day about what I did. Shortly after I was out of the special education system, I did the one thing that I honestly should have done the entire time I was at Horseheads. And that is, if I ever saw any of the special education faculty, and if any of them said hi to me, I completely ignored them. Partly because frankly, I never should have known who they were in the first place. But also because, they really weren't very good. And again, their mentality clearly is rubbed off on my generation. But because of that, and because I wanted to spend the rest of my life at that time making sure everybody forgot that I was in special ed, the moment that girl referred to her students as little retards, I laughed along with everybody else. That was the first time I ever publicly sympathized with my oppressors. And once you do that, there really is no going back. For me to say that people who work in the special education system, the faculty and anyone else who works there, for me to say that job should be taken away from them, that the special education system should be completely, abolished. Well, for one thing, there are people who legitimately need it. So I'd be taking that sort of support system, let's say, away from them. And I'd be taking away the jobs of so many people involved with it. For me to take all of that away from them would make me no better than the very oppressors that I sympathize with. So, yeah. That really is what's wrong with me. Depression and pragmatic communication disorder. I mean, some people are probably wondering, well, Nick, you're still diagnosed with something. I mean, you're still considered depressed. True, but considering everything that happened to me for the last 30 plus years, really I was 31 when I was properly diagnosed, so yeah, I guess we'll say 30 years and change. Considering everything that happened to me for like 30 years and change, I think I'd rather be sad than someone who's considered to be on the spectrum. At this point, if I was on the spectrum, I'd be pretty sad. That certainly would be something to be sad about. Or in the case of my grandmother, it definitely gave me a reason to not smile. Because again, that was why she said there was something wrong with me. She just based on the fact I wasn't smiling. Which really isn't a very good reason, by the way. So, yeah. That's where I am right now. All of that at one point made me contemplate just ending it all and committing suicide. But eventually, I would wind up not doing that anymore. And it was tomorrow, December 14th, 2008. That was the day that changed everything. But I have to really think about that and really reflect on what I said today. For now, I have a much better perspective on things. And I can truly talk about what changed everything in proper fashion. But for that, we have to wait until tomorrow. I am certain. Normally this is the part where I would say, I'd say I'm humbled, hopeful, all that stuff. And it's true. But for now, I just simply want to say, if anyone is going through any of these sorts of feelings of depression and suicide contemplation, and I'll be expressing this more as time goes on during this series of videos, please talk to someone. You have no idea how far it will go. So, yeah, that's about all I got. And now, tomorrow begins the real meat and potatoes of all of this. Have a nice day, everyone.